Okay, welcome everyone. It's really great to have you here again today. Hit on an important topic. I think it's one that probably I know that in my leadership career, both in the education sector, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to, I guess, some examples that have come out of my last day job, but also in my world as a thought leader and as somebody who's trying to help businesses to be able to move forward in this whole topic of how you can construct these types of performance conversations that really make a difference is something that's very common and that people seem to be grappling with everywhere. And I think that one of the important things that we need to do, I guess, even in embarking upon the topic, is to maybe just view it differently at the start. I think that whole notion of how we're going to build a conversation that's very geared around performance is quite antiquated. I think that we actually emphasize the word performance in that performance conversation way too much, and there's too much emphasis on that. And what it leads us to do is to sort of focus on building a performance speech, and we forget the conversation part of it that actually brings people to ease. And when people come to ease, then we can actually start to make it a learning experience. And I think that's the lens through which we should view this whole notion of trying to have a performance conversation or a performance management meeting or a performance appraisal, whatever you want to call it today. I'm going to let that term be quite generic for whatever it is in your organization today. And when we create a learning experience, then hopefully we can stop asking that exasperated question of when will they ever learn? Because it seems that what comes out of these conversations is often not acted upon. And so what we want to do is to make the learning experience one that's rich and deep for people, it's engaging for people, because what happens then is that their interest in it goes up. When their interest in being involved in a performance conversation goes up, they hold the conversation itself in a higher value. And when that exists, then there's a higher likelihood that they'll go back into the workplace and actually do the things that they've made a commitment to. Where they feel that it's not genuinely a conversation and certainly not genuinely a learning experience, what happens is that they tend to endure it and they tend to resist not only the conversation, but they resist acting upon the things that you've discussed in that conversation. And that's what I really want to make sure that we get past today, is so we can get to that point where something actually makes a difference after the performance conversation, rather than we just ticked off the template or the matrix for a 12-month annual performance conversation that many businesses and organisations seem to think covers off and allows us to make a genuine commitment to improvement. So we're going to try and do something about that today. And I guess the first thing we need to do is, when we're trying to identify what it is that we're trying to achieve or establish through these conversations, sometimes we've got to stop and ask ourselves, what is it that's preventing us from already doing it? And I would contend that there's 5 key reasons that people either dread performance conversations, and this is dreading the construction of those conversations, leading within those conversations, or they feel that they do an incredibly difficult, they're going to do a really bad job. They might put them off, or they might just freeze up in that conversation. So I guess the first one is that they feel that there's no plan. And so what I want to do today is to make it really clear what the plan is that you need to have in place for the sort of things that should come out of a performance conversation. We need to do the military thing of beginning with the end in mind, and then work backwards from there and create a process that allows us to get to that point. The process will be the linchpin on this, and the outcome might be not what you expected, but it will be something that people will engage with and come away with things that get a performance trajectory starting to happen, or an improvement trajectory starting to happen. I think the second reason that people struggle with and are held back from great performance conversations is they're worried about how the other person will take it. And so what we tend to do is sugarcoat things, or we subject them to horrible mechanisms such as sandwich feedback. I don't know if you've ever copped a little bit of sandwich feedback before. It's where somebody says something nice to you, And while they're saying that nice thing, you're very, very sure that the but is coming. And the but is the meat in the sandwich, where they hit you with something right between the eyes, and then they say something nice to you again at the end of it. And apparently, if you say something nice at the start and at the end, then you'll really cope with what's been hit you in the middle with. And it's not true. I think most of us have sat through something like that, where somebody sits us down and says, look, I just want to have a little chat with you about how you're going at work at the moment. You know, you're such a, a valuable contributor to our team, and you have a great sense of humour, and I like your hair, and you just know the butt is coming, and you just sit there thinking, oh, will you just get on with it? So we're worried about how people will take it, so we worry, so we distract ourselves from what we really should be talking about. The third reason that I think people struggle with performance conversations is that they question their own ability to do it. And like I said to you before, the absence of a plan is what creates that sort of level of anxiety. I want to talk a little bit more to that as we go forward as well. I think the fourth reason is that people are worried about the emotional response of the person that they're speaking to. And there are two key emotions that we worry most that might show up in the room when we're having a performance conversation. They're anger and sadness. I want to talk specifically to those at the end. And I think the fifth one is one that's probably the unspoken one, which is not their emotional response to what we talk about, but I actually don't want to step into this performance conversation because I'm a little worried about my emotional response. And that usually is geared around that sadness and anger issue. And I want to address that because I know that when one of those comes along, I have an emotional response that tends to derail and deflect me away from what really needs to be spoken about in that conversation. And I need to get to work on it. So I guess what I want to do today is identify that, first of all, that I spoke a moment ago about that anxiety concept. And I think that most of the time that both people who are entering into a performance conversation are feeling a high level of anxiety. And what it's about is that we're both walking into that meeting feeling that we need to perform. And there are various types of performance anxiety as illustrated in the picture today. And no, this is not a glimpse into my life. But I do think that in many, many different domains of our lives, we're concerned about how well we're going to perform. And what we need to do is to try to wash away some of that concept of performance and make it about, can we measure the quality of this conversation by the richness of the dialogue and not by the level to which either me as the leader of the meeting performed or how well the person who is being subjected to the performance conversation actually responds or performs themselves. Could we just say, let's measure it by how rich and how meaningful and how productive the dialogue is? And I guess from that point of view, I'd like to even encourage you today to not perform. Okay, it's okay. You don't have to feel that level of anxiety, but I do want to encourage you, and this is something that I want to happen in any performance conversation, is I want you to participate. I want you to step into it today. So even from that point of view, you can probably see on your screen through your little control panel that you've got via GoToWebinar that you've got some abilities to step in today. So you've got a hand up. You can see a little hand icon there that allows you to put your hand up. And if you do have something you want to contribute today, and I can just having a little flick through the attendee list, which is something that is an advantage from my end with the control panel. And I can see that we've got some people here today who've been to a few Real Learners webinars now. There are some familiar names there. And if you think you can contribute today, or if you think that there's a contextual question you'd like to have the lovely anonymity to just be able to say, you know what about this? Or what about Bob, when I'm working with that person? Then I want you to have the opportunity to ask that question. Now, if you put your hand up, I have the facility to unmute you, we can hear you, and we can have a good little yarn that really allows us to contextualise some of this IP today. And I guess the other thing you can do is use the question box. The question or the chat boxes that might appear on your screen. If you put a question in there, I'm going to try and keep a little eye on that today. And if you put anything in there that I think that I need to be aware of, I might stop, pause, and answer that question. And also, you've got a little bit of support in the background here. My wonderful business manager, Chris, is online with us again as usual today. And if you're having any tech issues or trouble just accessing the webinar today, then you can put them in there as well. So you can usually get your reset and back on board very, very swiftly. So we want you, don't worry about performance anxiety, but we do want you to participate today and to be a part of the webinar so that we can have this make a real difference for people. All right. I guess what I want to do today is talk to some of the things that we, first of all, in framing up how we're going to go about those performance conversations. The first thing I want to do is to identify for you that I will speak to the neocortex and not the amygdala within my performance conversation is something that I won't negotiate on. And what I mean by that is the neocortex is basically, in very layman's terms, the part of the brain that thinks, and amygdala is the part of the brain that ignites our limbic system, which means that it's the part of the brain with which we feel. It's really important for me that I'm going to try and put the person that I'm working with at genuine psychological and physical ease, so that the amygdala or the limbic system of their brain isn't too ignited, because what we know is that we don't think and feel very well at the same time. If our emotions are heightened, then our ability to compute and to make and to engage in rational thought is reduced. Our ability to use our neocortex system. So one of the must-haves for me is that I'm going to speak to the neocortex far more than I'm going to speak to the amygdala. And I guess what I want to do is emphasize also that these are the things that for me are non-negotiables. I need these things, these 4 things I'm going to point out to you today. They're not, I guess there's a difference between a need and a want. And I use this picture here because I sometimes have a little laugh at my beautiful wife Anthea's expense, is that she uses the word need and want interchangeably depending on the circumstance and how it can work for her. So if we're out shopping, there'll be certain shoes that she needs or a certain plant that she needs, whereas the truth is that she wants it. There are thousands of things that you might want to come out of a performance conversation, and they might even be things that you would want to come out of the limbic system. Certain feelings we want to feel at the end of a performance conversation that we've bonded over this, or we might want to feel that we're happy, or we want to feel that we're content, or we want to feel that we've validated the other person and that they've validated us as well. And they're nice to have, but they're not needs. So for me, these 4 things that I have in place here are things that I absolutely, uncategorically won't compromise on. I need these things to have a performance conversation run really well. The next one is that we will not finish the conversation and just have the product of that conversation is that we had a chat. Is that there will be achievable, meaningful goals that are set. And I'm going to talk to 3 types of goals today that you can focus on. And what I think happens is that if we can get a good spread across those 3, if we can even encourage people to have 1 of each, then what happens is they feed each other. I want to show you a couple of examples today of how that specifically can happen for you in constructing these conversations. And then the third thing that I really want to make absolutely explicit, because the word's in there, is that the support we're going to provide is explicit, which means that in any performance conversation, we shouldn't have the work that comes out of that conversation only be the work of the person who's been on the receiving end. The support that we're going to provide has to be made very clear and explicit for 2 reasons, really. One is that once we actually step up and make a commitment to it, it increases the accountability for the other person to step up and commit to their part of the plan. And then the second part of it is that very few goals are achieved without support. The reason that they're goals in the first place is because they're not being currently done. So what we want to do is add some support such that that person can reach a new level, and we have to make that support ridiculously clear. And the last thing is that review dates are set. And I do want to be, and I know that it's quite fashionable these days when we're talking about performance conversations to be anti the 12-month plan. But for me, I'm not so much anti the 12-month plan as I am being anti goals that don't take 12 months. So if we're setting a goal or a target that will take someone 12 months to achieve, and we make that support explicit, and it's a reasonable goal, and and it's all something that we're actually bought into, great. But if it is something that can be done in the next 3 weeks, then that's when the next conversation should happen. So we want to get really clear about nice review dates that actually reflect the gravity of the goal that we're setting, not just the cadence of performance conversations that we've established in our business or in our organisation. Moving on, I guess the last thing before I want to talk to this concept of goals is how you construct this conversation such that it becomes a learning experience, which is an extremely important thing to do. Number one, I guess, and this sounds Sounds very manipulative, doesn't it? Because it is. I want you to manipulate the context for a better result. There's a really clever fellow called Michael Grinder who speaks to a concept that really got under my skin when I first heard about it when I was a school principal, and it was the concept of contaminating space. And what Grinder said is that there are certain places that once a behaviour has happened there, we find it very difficult to escape the past when we land in that context again. So his example, and he didn't actually know that when I was in the room, Grinder, and he was describing this, he didn't know I was a principal, but he said his example is the principal's office. He said growing up, he said he had moments where he'd gone into the principal's office, and in another age, some things like leather belts had been present when he'd landed in the principal's office. But then what he found was that as a parent, when he went to the principal's office and had a meeting at the school, those feelings came back to him. And he found that there was such an acute level of anxiety for him in that principal's office that he said he just couldn't concentrate on what was going on. I remember myself having a teacher who had who I was helping through their probation, their first year of being a teacher, and you have to pass that probation to be able to go on to having an ongoing career. And I had to let her know that her performance wasn't at a level that would allow her to continue on. Very difficult conversation, not one I wanted to have, and I was putting it off. We sat down and we had the conversation. She had a very emotional reaction and stormed out of the office. And I knew I had to speak to her again. There was still several weeks to get through before the end of the year. And so I knew I had to speak to her again, but Grinder's words echoed in my ears that sitting down at that table in exactly the same space, in exactly the same seats, was going to bring back all the emotion that she experienced the last time that she was there. So I manipulated the context and we went out for a coffee. So it's really important to remember that the conversations you have don't have to be in the places that they would traditionally take place. I want to give you another example of that in a minute. The second one I want you to talk about, I want you to notice, is that taking a Socratic approach to conversation, and Socrates' great intention was to make sure that we ask questions. Is the best way to get things done. Often, listen, this is that trap that I spoke about before, where we're often, thinking heavily and planning comprehensively for what we're going to say within the conversation, whereas the truth is what we should be doing is planning far more for what we're going to ask. And if you ask the right questions, sometimes you don't have to say the things that you were going to craft for hours and hours until 1:30 in the morning. I remember working with a teacher, and she was a good teacher, and she had some absolute strengths, particularly in the maths and science area. And it just seemed that every time we talked to her, the conversation would be drawn to her strengths around maths and science. But the truth is there were two big problems. One was the way that she was programming. Her paperwork was a dog's breakfast. And two was the behaviour management of the students in the classroom was a real concern as well. And I thought hard about how I'm going to have this conversation with this teacher, and I crafted it and crafted it and crafted it. And just before it, I actually thought, I went and looked online and looked at some stuff, and I found this concept of taking a Socratic approach. And I thought, okay, maybe instead of me speaking to it, what I'll do is I'll ask. And so I asked, and in the meeting I asked, what do you think your strengths are? And she told me about the wonderful aptitude that she had for maths and science, and the ability to transfer that passion to her students. And I agreed. And I asked her what her weaknesses were. I'm pretty clear about the word weaknesses too, by the way. I don't think we need to, if we've got strengths, then we've got weaknesses, and I've got them, so I'm okay with that, and I'm okay with other people having weaknesses as well. And I said, what are your weaknesses? And she said, it'd probably be my programming and my behaviour management. And the elephant in the room has been discussed without me having to craft a wonderful 10-page speech and then remember it. So asking smart questions is often far more productive than crafting smart speeches. The third one is to make sure that you do tackle the tough stuff. If that teacher had not mentioned the programming and the behaviour management, then I would have. You cannot let the conversation end just because the questions didn't quite extract the right response from them. And then the last one I want you to take into account when you're constructing the conversation is to optimise making the environment as informal as you possibly can. I go back again to the principal's office concept, and a poor staff member that I had called Mick, who every time I called him in for a performance conversation would visibly sweat. And I could start thinking, this guy just really doesn't want to be in the room with me. And the truth is, unfortunately, he was one of those naughty boys as well that had found himself in the principal's office, and coming back to that position was not something that he really enjoyed at all. It's not something that also allowed him to answer questions productively and honestly as well. So just every now and then I used to just invite Mick out for into a less formal environment. Mick liked a beer, and we used to just pop down to the pub on a Friday afternoon at the end of the working week, and I'd just start to ask questions. And often Mick would get about 10 minutes into the conversation and say, "This is a performance conversation, isn't it?" And I would say, "Do you want me to just get my laptop out and fill in the form?" And he would say, "Yeah, you might as well." Because we had enough fodder then to fill that form in, and he felt comfortable, he felt it was meaningful, and it was happening in a place where the informality had driven his ability to engage in a much higher way. Just got a quick question from Ben that I want to check on. Was Mick saying he actually started early to avoid his wife? It's actually a different Mick, but believe me, there must be something in my recruiting processes that mean that I was drawn to the wrong kind of Mick, Ben. But both of those Micks turned out to actually do some fantastic work for me, which was really good. Okay, let's get on to this concept of goals. I reckon that there are 3 types of goals that we should be paying attention to. And the first of these, what we call professional goals. So what are they all about? So the first one is that they could be linked to the technical, the aspects of their role or their industry. So if you're talking about working with bank tellers, there are certain skills that they're going to need. If you've got an IT platform, there are certain skills and capabilities that they're going to need, even if they may leave you and go to another organisation with those skills, even if it prepares them to move into a different role. They're big goals. They're big goals that are very important to them in, like I said, in that role or in that industry. They also can be the things that encourage promotion and career acceleration. So it could be a goal like the ability to take some of that technical skill and lead with it. So I've had teachers who I worked with who actually worked on their abilities around public speaking, because they had some technical expertise, but they didn't have the ability to present it to others in a way that they could access that expertise. So public speaking is something that was going to help them to be a leader, no matter what the working environment is that they were working in. But it was something that I was prepared to commit to them around and helping them with as a professional goal. And I guess the third thing to remember is that these may lead good people out of your team, and that's okay. It actually is the one thing that really clever organisations do in positioning themselves as a destination organisation for people to work in. I go back to thinking about a wonderful principal I had who, when I was an assistant principal at school, so working my way through leadership, and she used to encourage me to set professional goals as well, because it made her school the place that people wanted to go and be the assistant principal. So I arrived there as someone who was very good around human behaviour, but had absolutely no idea on the financial management of the school. And so what she did was she helped me set professional goals that had me working with the business manager in the organisation, so that I knew exactly the way that the organisation worked. And she knew very well that that meant that I would probably at some stage move on from the organisation, but she knew that she could make full effect of my skill set while I was there. She didn't want people who were there to tread water or to do what they'd previously done. She wanted people there who would learn, who would lead, and then, to be honest, who would leave, and so that she could bring someone else in who would address another strategic need for the organisation. Get comfortable with people coming in and out of your organisation, because if you can position yourself really nicely, they're people that will make a genuine difference to the organisation. The next set of goals are called operational goals. And I guess the first thing to remember is that these are ones that are linked really specifically to your current business objectives. So they help people in your team to contribute to the overall success of your team. So this is something that goes to even your Gen Y employees and how, you know, often in business we bemoan that Gen Y employees move on so quickly. They can have up to 27 average different careers and jobs in their life, and we wonder what it is that would keep them there and would stop that expertise and that skill just floating out the door so randomly and so regularly. The truth is that one of the things that they're very heavily invested in is feeling that they're part of a team that's improving and that's getting better and that is succeeding, and they want their role to be very clear as being a part of that success. So if they feel that the organisation's improving, if they see that, and then if they also see that that they're a very clear part of that improvement agenda, then they tend to stick around longer, which can be a really worthwhile thing for you to be able to do. They may be relationship or team-based, and the team-based work can be around projects that people take on. So instead of just saying in performance conversations, okay, there's a part of your work that we're going to talk about today that I want you to do better, it's about asking questions such as, do you see any new opportunities that would allow you to work differently, or to take on a new responsibility, or to drop an old responsibility? So they can be about, you know, we want you to take on this brand new project, we want you to take on this brand new product, or we want you to lead this new team, and that will help the organisation move forward if you branch out in a different direction. And the other thing, I guess, for me is they need to be connected to, you know, straight away impact. It needs to be, we need to be able to see the progress of those operational goals. We need to be able to see that they're getting better at it, and making that process, that progress measurable for people. That, you know, once you do this, then you do that, and then you do this, and oh, how fantastic, we've ticked off the first 3 steps, is hugely motivating for people. So they need to know that they've made a genuine impact in the organisation, and that they're able to see that as well. And then the third set of goals that I want you to pay you know, real credence to are personal goals. And this, for me, is the linchpin that's often missing from professional learning conversations. And we forget that people are people, and they've got, and we tend to be more motivated by our personal goals. I'll tell you in a minute why I think that was that's an important point. But number one, I guess what I want you to do is to facilitate abilities for people to come to work with their tyres pumped up. And I used to ask that very question all the time. What is it that will allow you to come to work pumped up? What is it that will allow you to come to work lit up? Or what is it that will allow you to come to work with a lot of energy to do really well? I remember, you know, a couple of examples that I want to unpack under personal goals here. You know, one, I remember Shannon, who told me that she wanted to be fitter. And I said, well, what do you mean? And, you know, and there's a little bit here, I guess, if I was to flick through a couple of these here. You know, I look at point 3 here, I go, work relevance, how does it help if Shannon's fitter? And all that, yeah. And she said, look, my work requires a lot of energy. I teach prep, and prep's man, it's just like herding cats for 7 hours every day. And she said, I just feel that when I'm not fit, I just don't do as good a job, and I can't keep up with it. I'm not concentrating by the end of the day. And so I was prepared to do that. I was prepared to actually check in on her and ask her how often she was getting to the gym, or whether she'd been for a walk that morning, or whether she was eating well. And I was just helping her to be able to do that. And that's because your personal goals can, point number 2 there, they can connect to personal well-being. It's about making their lives a little better. And people, again, when we talk about retention in the workplace, people feel that when the workplace is interested in their life being better, that they want to hang around and they want to do better work as well. And then the third one here is, wherever you can, maintain work relevance, but I want you to keep really broad about that. Keep a really open mind about what work relevance is. I had another employer called Barry who came to me and said that he wanted me to help him quit smoking. And I said, all right, and in my head I'm going, work relevance, work relevance, work relevance, how does this help, how does this help? And Barry said to me, he said, look, he said, I haven't been a teacher for very long, and he said, you have a rule in the school that nobody can smoke on the school grounds or anywhere that can be seen from the school grounds. And I said, yes, I do. And he said, so that means every recess and lunchtime, he said, I have to jump in my car and drive up the road to be able to have a gasper. And I said, yes, you do. And he said, which means I miss all the conversations that people are having over a coffee or over a sandwich, where they're making sense of the things that, you know, and sharing successes and sharing challenges about the things that you're asking us to do at school. And I said, yes, I am. And so it became clear that there was some work relevance here in terms of Barry being able to, you know, stick around and be in that social environment of the tea room. And so I set about it. So what did I do? I had, you know, Barry said, maybe you could just, you know, stay off my back, and I'll talk in a minute about why that's a bad idea. And I said, well, what about if I just checked in on you once a week? And I love the way that personal goals lends itself to the idea of support being explicit, like I said before, and also the way that allows me to, you know, find little ways to make support happen that don't cost me a lot. So for both Shannon and for Barry and for a couple of other people, I had Friday morning emails. So it took me about 3 minutes all up on a Friday morning to email about 6 or 7 staff members, and just to check in, hey Shannon, how many times have you been to the gym this week? And she felt that was a really supportive thing because I was going to check in. And I checked in with Barry and said, mate, how many gaspers have you had this week? And he would sometimes reply positively, and sometimes, you know, he'd said he'd had a little bit of a lapse, but he was trying to get back on. And I want to ask you the question that if I make that commitment, that, like I said, costs me about 3 minutes of my work week every week, how much do you think the people who I had professional and operational goals set with felt accountable to those goals if I was living up to the support that I was providing around their personal goals? And the truth is, it's high. You know, what happens is that if you commit to helping people improve their lives, then they feel obliged. They feel obliged to the strong relationship that they have with you to step up into those professional and to those operational goals. And that's a win-win-win scenario for absolutely everybody. So I spoke before to this notion of making support explicit. And again, I just want to flick through these 3 points here so that you can see them in advance. And so what I think you need to do in terms of making that support explicit is, in any documentation that you're building, make sure that there's a section in there, or that if there's not, there's at least reference to how you're prepared to do your bit. The second bit is to look for ways to make your support informal and ongoing. So if you think now about my Friday emails, it ticked off on both of those aspects. First, it was informal. So it felt very personal in the way that I was supporting. And then secondly, it was ongoing. So it just kept bobbing up. So sometimes we fall for the mistake when people are looking to set an improvement goal of going, right, what can I do to fix this? And we might allocate budget to send them away on a workshop. The problem with that is that it's a formal thing to do. It's something that we're used to doing. Secondly, the workshop happens often exterior to the organisation. And thirdly is that it happens once. And we hope that that's going to be significant enough support. Informal supports that are ongoing tend to bring people back in a more meaningful way to the commitments that they've made. And then the last one here is to follow what we call the live person rule, which means don't allow them to ask for support that requires you to do nothing. So Mick, sorry, it wasn't Mick, it was Barry. Barry's request that I stay off his back, and that is something that a dead person could do. So, you know, stay off my back, leave me alone, just leave it with me and we'll see how I go. Don't put any pressure on me. They're things that anybody could do, that Weekend at Bernie's could do. And what we want to have is your support active and visible. So we're looking to have, you know, things like, I'll send you an email once a week that just checks in on and sees how you're going. Or I will keep track of what the progress is, and I'll put a little, put a little, a little star in the box or something like that every time you hit a certain target, so you can see the progress. So we want to have your support very active, and that's what people really notice and appreciate. And then that last component is to set review dates, and that means asking ourselves a couple of key questions. First of all, it's about how long should it take to get this achieved. I want to briefly tell you the story of Lara. Lara was a teacher who was in my employ, who was a fabulous teacher. She'd been teaching for about 7 or 8 years, and she was impossible to get into my office to have a performance conversation. Every time I did, she would manage to pull the dentist appointment, or she'd have some reason that she couldn't be there that bobbed up in a hurry, and ended up the only way that I could actually get a performance conversation with Lara was to ambush her. And I just landed in her office and I said, we're going to sit there and have this conversation now, let's go. And one of the first questions I did ask in that in my attempts to be Socratic was, "What's the story here? Why has this been so difficult to organise?" And she said, "Look, Adam," she said, she goes, "I've been teaching for 8 years. I've had one performance conversation. It was absolutely ridiculous. We wrote down a bunch of goals that I never saw again, that no one else ever saw again. No one did anything about. And I think, what's the point? If you want me to do good work, just let me do good work and get out of my way." So the good part is that Lara is nothing if not honest with me. And so I said, "Okay," well, I said, "Can you hang in there long enough to just give me a crack at it?" And we set one professional, one operational, and one personal goal in place for Lara. And then what I did, that she said that she found that was very different about this conversation, was that I did ask the second question, which was, "When will we next chat about how this is going?" Because we were asking these questions about how long will it take you to do this? And there was a couple of goals there that Lara had that were, that were really only going to take no more than about 3 or 4 weeks to knock off. And so she said, "Does that mean we need to have another full meeting?" I said, "Not necessarily." I said, "But I'll tell you what, stick your head in my office when you've knocked off one of these goals and just tell me, and then we'll see what we need to do next." And so what happened was that Lara did exactly that. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, she stuck her head in my office at morning tea and said, "Hey, I've knocked off that operational goal now." And I said, "Beauty." And as I sort of started to just small talk with her, I opened my computer and opened Lara's performance plan. And I said, "So we need a new one, eh?" And so Lara still hadn't sat down. She was still standing in my doorway. And she said, "Yeah, I've been thinking how you want me to get better at this maths program and how I need to go and watch a couple of the teachers who are doing it." And I said, "So 2?" And she said 2. And I said, I quickly typed in that she would go and observe 2 teachers who were really real guns at delivering this maths program. I said, "How long is it going to take you to do that?" She goes, "Oh, I can do that in the next 3 or 4 weeks." And I said, "Okay, no worries." And just wrote that in the plan. And I said, "I'll email you, go and get a coffee and I'll email this to you. You'll have it on your desk by the time you get back to your classroom after recess." Lara went from having one performance plan done over 8 years to getting to the point where we had 11 incarnations of Lara's performance plan over the next 12 months. So you can see how many goals were being ticked off by building that cadence and getting clear about, I mean, really? Would it have taken Lara 12 months to go and watch 2 teachers teach for an hour? I mean, it's unrealistic to think that we need to be setting such long targets for things that are very achievable. And when the ticking off of those things, the way we feel such great satisfaction from ticking something off a list. When we can tick that off, it's so motivating to try and get around to the next task. So that's what we want to get in place for people. All right, those 2 emotions, okay, because I want to be really clear that the one that bugs me about the things that hold me back is definitely what my emotional response would be, and it's usually my emotional response to their emotional response. So when things get a little bit limbic system and we get a bit too feely and not very thinky in the performance conversation, we tend to have either anger or sadness. Now, I would contend to you that we all have in that space a bit of a kryptonite and a bit of a superpower. There's one you can handle and there's one that you absolutely can't. For me, I can handle anger. I can live with it. I can cope with it. I think it comes from a career in schools of working with perhaps some less than content teenage males that where the anger thing bobs up, I'm all right, it's water off a duck's back to me. But it is really important that we have a plan if anger isn't your thing. So what we want to do is to first of all stay calm, but be firm. Okay. So what we don't want to do in that situation, in the situation when somebody gets angry, is to reduce the expectations. Keep your voice volume beneath that of the other person. When somebody steps into anger, what they're actually inviting you into is competition. And so what we know is that when my voice gets loud and then you decide to come back at me with a louder voice, you're daring me to hit the ball back over the net. And so it's become a competitive situation, and that means that the volume's going to get louder and louder and louder, and we know where that's going in terms of being able to subside anger. Be very comfortable with ending the conversation until everyone's very calm again, and also recognise that it is the feelings part of their brain speaking and not the thinking part. So I don't know about you, but if you've ever had an argument with your partner, I don't know if you've ever walked away from that argument sometimes, and when you've managed to calm down, you sort of find yourself placing your forehead into the palm of your hand and asking yourself, what on earth did I say that for? And the truth is, it doesn't even make sense that I brought that up. Why did that come up? And the truth is, because it doesn't. When the feeling part of your brain is capable of saying some really weird and wonderful and colourful stuff, and don't expect that that's their true feeling. Some people say that, you know, only drunks and angry people can be believed because people really tell the truth in that state. I don't think that's the truth at all. I think that when people are angry, they say some really odd stuff that we can actually just allow to float by and not hold them to. If the anger becomes very severe, then take a safety first approach. So know that it's, you know, that it first of all is about, you know, end the meeting, get yourself out of there. You don't need to hang around while someone has a complete tantrum. In fact, it's highly, you know, completely unproductive to do so. And know, I guess, which is your personal challenge with anger and with sadness, and be ready to cope with that. I think that myself, any key concept that you're looking to unpack can be best unpacked through the wonderful George Costanza. So let's have a look at how healthy George Costanza's approach from Seinfeld is to anger.
Is there some unresolved issue between you and Jason?
I don't know, a little something called Step 9. Instead of an apology, he was bebopping and scatting all over me.
I'm not sure what you want me to do.
Well, aren't you the boss of him? You shouldn't let him move up. When I was in the Cub Scouts, I got stuck on Weebelos for 3 years because I kept losing the Pinewood Derby.
You're quite upset today.
Well, I think you should drop him down to Step 2.
And if there's a higher power?
Let him chew on that for a while.
You know, George, I think I can help you. We're having a meeting tomorrow. Why don't you just come by?
All right, that's more like it. Thank you very much. By the way, my uncle was an alcoholic.
Okay, let's get started. Welcome to Rageaholics Anonymous.
What? Rageaholics?
George, this can help you.
Hey, I am not here for rage. I'm here for revenge.
Excuse me. We have a no yelling policy at these meetings.
Excuse me. Am I talking to you, Pinhead? Am I?
Please don't call me Pinhead.
I'm losing it.
He took you to Rageaholics. Why?
Probably because this whole universe is against me.
Got a little rage.
And now they want me to bottle it up. It makes me so mad.
So I think what you can see there is that you know, when we make anger a competitive thing and we're trying to beat other people through it, it just doesn't work for us like poor old George. When it gets to sadness, and I want to admit readily here that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here with some wonderful work that was written in a book that I want to suggest to you around this topic called Dealing with the Tough Stuff by Darren Allison Hill and also by Dr. Sean Richardson. And their advice around dealing with sadness has been something that I've taken full effect of, because this is my kryptonite. When people cry, this is where I'm horribly tempted to abandon the plan and to rescue people. So the 5 rules that I've tried to keep in place here is, number 1 is to allow people to cry. It is not my job to stop them. So me having the first response to a tear in the room is don't cry, please don't cry, is not productive, and nor will it actually stop them from crying. For tissues is a really clever one for me, so that's given me something to do. So whether the tissues is useful or not, I wouldn't suggest putting them on the table before the conversation. You might be priming them for the bad news that is to come. But I really want to encourage you to, you know, have a plan, have something that you can do when that moment comes along. So if I'm going to have a performance conversation, just to the side of the desk there might be a box of tissues handy. So if that tear comes, instead of me stepping in and trying to speak and trying to stop them, I've got something that I can do instead. And offering tissues is a great way to demonstrate a little bit of empathy. I don't want to fall for the it's okay trap, because for some people, crying's quite tactical. And what happens is that once they cry, I'm tempted to say things like, it's okay, everything will be fine, even if it won't be. So that's the limbic system of my brain starting to speak there, and we don't want that to happen. So be really careful about that notion of just saying that it's going to be okay when it's not. The 4th one, and this is one that I've often struggled with as well, is that just waiting just calmly and patiently just sitting and waiting for somebody to get past that emotional moment is a worthwhile thing to do. And it just allows them the chance to collect their thoughts as well, and to be able to make sure that the next thing they say is relevant as well. They're not very good at listening while they're crying. So you know what, just let them recover. Just sit, just wait, and be comfortable with that silence. And the next one is last one here for me is always remember to express empathy, not sympathy. So don't tell them that you feel sorry for them. Don't tell them that you know exactly what it's like for them, because they're all things that are just about you. Empathy is that, wow, I can see that this is having an impact on you. Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable? Because that way you're understanding what it's like for them, not what this experience is like for you. And that allows people to drift back from being in that emotional state to back into a thinking state really effectively. Again, let's be clear about tactical crying, that it's probably best understood through George Costanza.
You see, this is the thing. I just feel like I can't do this anymore. I just feel like I'm not ready yet. I'm frightened. I'm scared. I just feel like we're time to get to know each other. I'm too nervous. I can do it in March. I promise. I promise no more postponements. I just need to read for fun, please. I'm so
Oh, of course, it can wait so much if that's what you want.
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry. Yes, of course.
Hey, so what happened? Did you hold your ground, or
Nope. I wept like a baby.
what?
Well, I started to tell her, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, I just burst into tears.
You cried?
I bawled uncontrollably. I just poured my guts out. And I'll tell you, Jerry, it was incredible. I never realized how powerful these tears are. I could have postponed it another 5 years if I wanted.
Had a fabulous teacher called Karen, who's a friend to this day, who whenever she needed something knew that she would need a powerful story. And she knew that the one way to make a powerful story with Adam was to make sure that the waterworks showed up. Now, I say that in such a way that it makes Karen sound like a sinister person. And I don't think that she had that level of consciousness in the way that she came into conversations with me. But what she worked out, because I was treating her that way, I was training her to treat me, is that you need a powerful story, you need an emotional story. And once that emotion comes along, Adam's more likely to take action that ends the emotion rather than make a really clever decision. So I was more likely to agree to the new program, to the funding, to signing the check that would allow Karen to do the work that she wanted to do if a strong emotional response, in particular sadness or despair, was to show up in the conversation. So, look, yeah, maybe we can just learn everything about performance conversations through George Costanza. Look, guys, thank you so much for coming along today. I do want to encourage you that all the slides from today are available for you. So in that handout section that you can see in your control panel, you can download the slide deck from today's webinar. And I really want you to have that and just and be able to refer to it for future reference, particularly for the people that have made a really genuine and a big effort to come along today. If you do have any questions, just make sure over the next minute or so that you pop them in the question box, or that you whack your hand up so that we can make sense of things for your organisation as well. And I just want to remind you, this is a snippet, this whole performance conversations component of some of the workshops that we run for organisations about how you can take some of the practices, and performance conversations are one of them, and make them learning experiences, make them things that people, really, like I said at the start, one, are interested in, and two, that they really value and that they do something as a result of. So we speak about that, we coach people how to do it, we're training people on the ways that they can, whole organisations can take on this project, and then we show people how, from a partnership perspective, we could work together over a long term to allow that learning concept, this learning theory, to impact multiple domains in which your organisation has to work these days. So if there's anything that you think that I can do to give you a hand with that, then just pop the word chat in the question box, and we'll make a personal follow-up with you to make sure that you're getting the help that you need. We'll leave it there. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much again for coming along and for dedicating an hour of your life, an hour of your busy time to this. We're not going to run a webinar in December because, you know, come middle of December, we figure you're probably more inclined to be going to a work Christmas party and focusing on the light at the end of the tunnel than you are to be coming along at a webinar. But rest assured, this is coming back. We're going to be bringing back all of this work in January, and we're going to be hitting on some topics right across 2018 that we reckon can make a really significant difference in your business or your organisation. So until January, until the new year, have a wonderful Christmas, everyone, or whatever it is that you do that celebrates the end of the year. Enjoy the breaking in of 2018, and we'll see you when that year rolls around. Okay, bye for now.